Welcome to the Software People Stories. I'm Shiv.
I'm Chitra.
And I'm Gayatri.
We bring you interesting, untold stories of people
Associated with the creation
Or consumption of software-based solutions.
You'll hear stories of what worked,
and sometimes what didn't,
you will also hear very personal experiences.
and insights that would trigger your thoughts
And inspire you to do even greater things.
I continue my conversation with Ravi Krishnappa, the managing partner at July Ventures. In this part of the conversation, he shares his own experiences and perspectives on accelerated learning when everybody is pressed for time, entrepreneurship, the qualities that make an entrepreneur, and how do you assess the success of an entrepreneur, about giving it back, and tips to be a lifelong learner. Listen on.
Another related point that you mentioned is that one of the things that you had to do was to learn new domains quickly. Right. So what is your secret or any tips for this accelerated learning?
Again, it stems from curiosity, but the other one is very simple, right? We know this, at times it becomes, we don't apply it ourselves. As somebody who's a student, any student who has taught another person will tell you that they learned more while trying to teach than while learning to learn for themselves. Right? I mean, this is the very, very. This is not new, right? All of us know. You spend a lot more. You pay a lot more attention. Spend a lot more quality time. If I am supposed to teach somebody, right? Yeah. So one of the things that I put myself through is if I pick a new area, I spend the time and effort to go and figure out how would I explain this, or how would I teach this in a 5-10 minute period, or how would I get the concept across in a very short period of time to somebody else who is not aware of this, right? And then it could be where you draw parallels in other industry. It could be where you draw from your experience of the breadth, or anything that they themselves know, right? So, and this we apply everywhere, except that I don't think we apply it when we start learning. So, if I have to teach basic if I have to teach electrical today, right? What will I use? I will use, we always use this, right? We always use the water system, right? I'll say potential is like a height of a water tank, right? Your resistance is dictated by the size of the pipe. Why thicker the pipe, so that means more flow of current. So I can use the whole household plumbing system to explain most of what happens in a electrical, including an electronics kind of stuff, right? I can even go down and explain what's a capacitor equivalent, right? And or what's a, and if you were to actually think about applying similar things to newer pieces that you have to learn, I think we'll learn a lot more. And this is the trick. I try and see if I can encapsulate. So if tomorrow somebody were to ask me, what's Gen AI fundamental, I don't need to, or I don't spend a lot of time. I don't have to understand, the base differences between, let's say, Google's platform or OpenAI's platform. But I'll do spend a bit of time to understand what the course is, and is there a way that I can explain it to somebody else?
Extending that, when you mentioned your association with the supply chain, or even in terms of incubation, some of the companies that you mentioned, to be a successful organization as an entrepreneur, it is beyond just the technology solution, which means that there have to be connects to the ecosystem, whether it is other partners, other players in the system, or maybe regulatory authorities or standards, bodies, and so on. So how have you approached those, particularly for the organizations that you incubated, to get them to appreciate? Because the reason I'm asking this is because now it has reduced a bit, but till a couple of years ago, many people would come and say that, I have this idea for an app. Anyway, my husband or wife is working, so can I just jump and then start up? Saying having an idea for an app is not a business.
Right.
So how do you understand the ecosystem, or how do you work with an ecosystem?
Yeah. So idea in itself is nothing, right? We have, as investors of all people, know that you can have. I have tons of ideas. Every day I wake up and say, hey, this is a good idea, right? The latest one is we said, design faults. We said we have to have a list of all what we notice as design faults, and we have to have a repository of design faults, kind of stuff, right? But I think ideas by themselves are not the piece. I think two bits is I don't think people pay attention to very fundamental people-related pieces. One is, to your point of app, I think people have to still understand what are the behavioral imperatives when you come to an app, right? Or what are the social and behavioral imperatives that you come to when you come to an app? Or you talked about regulatory pieces. What are the regulatory pieces associated with what is it that you're trying to do? So while things like regulatory pieces are very easy, I think it's the insight that you spend some time, or insight that you're looking for when you talk to somebody, right? When I talk to somebody, well, it could be anybody that you have a conversation. They are an expert in that area, right? When you have a conversation, in a lot of cases, I think we spend a lot of time having very superficial conversations, right? Conversation for the sake of conversations, where I don't think we are open-minded enough to learn about it. We are kind of in a mode where we are commenting, or we are espousing our own views on that particular industry, right? What all it takes, I think, is to listen more when you have these conversations and tie this back, right? And I'll give you an example. Today in the afternoon, we were talking to one of our portfolio companies. They are in the supply chain area, and then one of the things that came up was who else do you want to associate with? At which time I said, look, I do know based on something else that we have done before that in the shipping industry, insurance is a big piece, and given the Houthi issues, the Red Sea problems, etc., that whole place is undergoing massive change. Now, all it needs is for you to pay attention to what's happening in the shipping problem associated with the Red Sea conflict and what seems to be happening there. Not just the pirate side. That's just almost news, right? It's not something to do with. It's news and it's supply chain. At that point, I said, look, if you are trying to do all of these, obviously there is an insurance angle associated with this. Don't worry about they were worrying about how do I track and trace. I said, don't worry about track and trace. Spend a bit of time to see, is there an insurance angle that we can go back and say that, look, this is before the shipment even happens, if you can go back and say, this is a red flag, this is possible insurance issue, and in which case, it's not. So whether it will convert to something, I don't know, right? It's too early. It's just happened this afternoon. This conversation has just happened this afternoon. But I'm using that as an example to say, what is your awareness of the market as it happens, and a view of what you think could happen, right? And there you are not actually expounding your views. You are just exposing the thought and asking somebody to drill down and work through this particular set, right? And I, when you talked about lots of people talking about app, nowadays it's the season for all of everything and anything to do with EV, right? And I keep getting the same feedback saying, oh, we have this, we have another piece. So, the questions that I have had is, look, we have a case where somebody would today, take about auto rickshaw, right? E-auto rickshaw. The concept is oh, I want to do this. We want to put it. Why should auto rickshaw be a IC engine? And at times I wondered whether these people are really thinking through this, or they're going through that. So my example in that case was, guys, have you realized that in Bangalore, an auto driver does not own the auto, right? It's almost on a daily rental basis, right? Most cases, and not that it's most cases, right? There is essentially a equivalent of an Arthia. There was a person who has about 20, 40 autos, the local Muslim who has some autos and who leases his out. And these autos are parked in a very small bylane in the night, or they use it in different cities. And the idea is to do 100% utilization. Where it is not available, they don't go park it in an open space. They're parking it close to it. So saying today with an IC process, an internal combustion engine, that's fine because you're not worried about charging it.
Yeah.
But if you say that I have to go create a charging infrastructure, then I'm not so worried about the charging infrastructure. I'm more worried about the parking infrastructure that you would find in the bylanes of Shivajinagar. You're not going to get the parking infrastructure to support this, right? So the point I'm making is this situational awareness, and I know just that keeping your thought open, working through and understanding to that. I think a lot of people make assumptions based on what they read in the highlights in Economic Times or one of the articles, right? I think it pays a lot of dividend if you spend some time, do a bit of independent thinking.
Yeah, we hear all these stories at Red Bus also. The primary research, going there, actually doing it, observing for oneself.
Correct. Right?
But then the related dilemma that many people face is, when do I stop the analysis? When I have to take a decision, when I have to take the next step.
So it's a matter of conviction, Sivaguru. The whole entrepreneurship journey starts off where you're saying that I am willing to go beyond my sphere of comfort, right? And so I would assume that whenever you are starting something new, there is a certain amount of discomfort, right? And I would even argue that discomfort is good, right? Because that keeps you on your toes. So at least for me, I can't speak on behalf of others. At least for me, there comes a time where you think that this is a worthwhile bet to spend time on and commit the next few years of your life to, right? And that conviction comes only, I mean, as I said, if you have really done this on the field, spent a bit of time, you will know when that conviction is, right? Or at least wherever I've had this conversation with some of the others, they've always talked about similar, tipping over from the area of the area of dilemma to an area of clarity, where you go and say, yes, this makes sense, for me to jump over. But yeah, it could be different for different people. I can't profess to say what is it for others.
Yeah. But from your experience of incubation and nurturing, have there been instances where that excitement sometimes kind of comes lower, or like you mentioned just now, nudging them to think beyond what they are thinking, either to do more or do something different, etc. How is that?
So all the time, it's all the time. I mean, we talked about some of the names. I can give you at least 5, 6 names or more where we have failed, right? The earliest one was a company called 360 Buzzards, where we were doing what Slack does today, right? Or we were planning to do. I talked about Collate Box, which is like, if you've heard of Smartsheet, we had more customers than Smartsheet, and we had better traction and better feedback than Smartsheet. But then again, ahead of time, we couldn't raise funds in time. We couldn't expand that out. Investee companies that went under, so early investors in Square Plum. So whatever you see as a shared office space, we were very early in that space. We worked through. You have a lot of people who will remember a company called Alma Mater, exited that. because he couldn't scale beyond a particular piece. So yeah, just like I say that there are a few successes, I think all of us are painfully brought down to earth with the fact that we have had a string of what I would label not as failures, because entrepreneurship is never a failure. There's always something that you learn, right? But commercially, where you have not made money, right? Where it has been commercial failures. But you may have had the satisfaction. I mean, to that point, even Science Center couldn't sustain. But I still get people who will come back and say, hey, that was a great thing. It changed our lives, etc. So happens all the time. I think this is where it is very important for us and for the entrepreneur that we work with to also kind of share that vibe, right? Because in the end, if an entrepreneur says, no, I'd rather shut this down instead of trying to go through a few more years of my life doing this. As investors, I mean, earlier I would probably try and get a way out, but now as investors, we don't have too many choices, right? We have to let go and say, okay, what is done is done.
That's actually a nice segue to another question that I can had, which is, as an incubator or as an investor, as an angel, whichever stage you get in, you do help the organizations grow. Then you also want them to be sustainable. And even in your own story, you did talk about starting something and then looking at new challenges to solve or something to learn, etc. How difficult is it to walk away from something that you are invested in?
Extremely difficult. I mean, as simple. I still get mails on Science Center. I still have people coming out to me, talking to me, and I still have people who will say, "Hey, what happened to ASBot?" So extremely difficult to walk away. But as I said, I think let me put this other way. For somebody like me, over time it's gotten easier, right? But for a first-time entrepreneur who has to walk away, right? I've had this conversation with multiple people. Whenever some of our own investing companies, that the person comes and says, "I don't know what to do," right? Right? And I've had this in cases, and not specifically, but there is a statement that I make and say that, look, if it has reached a stage where it is starting to impact your night's sleep and your health, right? Seriously consider walking away, right? Because one, the fact that you've reached such a stage means that it is impacting you beyond what you thought it would impact, right? And then the negative side is, in that frame of mind, I'm not really sure if the entrepreneur will continue to take rational decisions, right? And or the necessary decisions that are going to be impactful, right? So I'm trying to answer your question in a different way. I'm trying to say that, look, if you know at what point you need to walk away, or you should be walking away, I think that's one of the possibly the best way for you to be able to handle it. But is it easy to walk away? I mean, not at all. I mean, it's something that you spent a lot of time with. You have invested in the idea. You have invested in the process. Extremely tough.
What about the other side, when you get acquired, for instance?
Yeah. So when you get acquired, it's actually much easier. And when you get acquired, two things happen. I think when you get acquired, there are two kind of people in the organization. When you reach the position of acquisition, there are those one or two individuals who are probably kind of happy that they have got out of operational issues and they are handing it over to a larger company, right? I'm giving it to you from my personal experience, right? In those cases, there is almost a sense of relief, right? Right? And I'm not making this up to sound any different, but it's since 1994, except for the time period that I was with Oracle, I have not had a month-to-month paycheck. Right? And to date, people in the family say, how do you manage this? Right? How do you manage this uncertainty where you don't have a month-to-month paycheck, right? Or you will. I mean, not that you will not get paid. There's a cash flow issue. You obviously prioritize the paying off the employees than paying yourself, right? And this has happened in the Innertech times. This has happened post that. We see it happening in some of our portfolio companies. We see it almost every case. So, yeah, this is a piece. I think it's a question of you being mature about how to handle that and being open about that process and ensuring that you are at least mentally fair to yourself and mentally fair to your co-workers or whatever it is, right? To walk with a clear conscience. Then the good thing is, I keep saying a good night's sleep is a good indicator.
Okay. Yeah, it's a simple thumb rule, but I guess everybody has to internalize it to actually find their. So we've been talking a lot about business and money and those kinds of things, but I recall that you were associated at the time with doing some work in rural schools, even before I think Science had done.
Correct. Yeah.
So from a social impact perspective, are you still associated with anything?
Yeah. So I'm very passionate about education, as I said. Impact still associated with Sikshana. That is the one that you're referring to. I'm still a trustee of Sikshana, though I don't spend as much time as I used to do earlier. Earlier, I would actually go into the field, spend a bit of time and work through. Now it's grown to a stage where they do over 50,000 schools. They have a staff in a couple of hundred people as staff. So they don't need our level of impact. But yeah, still associated with education. I still spend a bit of time across the board. It could be K-12 to engineering, to non-engineering, to teaching about innovation, putting together some incubation structures, and so that's been a primary area that I've been working with. In between, I've done some bit of work on government digital systems, Panchayat Raj. How do you do that? The kind of stuff. So as I said, during COVID, did some bit of work. Spent a bit of time from an architecture perspective or from an IT perspective in some of these areas, other than Science Center. I also try and take a few sessions for engineering students in some of the colleges to make sure that especially in the first year, make sure that they understand the cross functional pieces that they need to do. Right? Although first year is supposed to be the generic piece, we enter first year of engineering without really understanding the fundamental basis of science, everything that we have learned till 12th. So I write a few articles, I write a few pieces. So education is something that I've been involved with. And a few others, depending on where the need is.
So far, I've been asking you questions based on something that you said and some things I always wanted to know. Is there any other message that you would like to share with our listeners?
Yeah.
Probably the dominant segments of listeners are one who are just entering IT. And the second is those who are going through what may generically be called as a midlife crisis in IT. Yeah,
so I think I'll do the common denominator first, and then I'll do the specific one. The common denominator is as I said, get as curious as you can be. Right? There's really no substitute to curiosity in being able to get you out of bed, get you looking at something with a fresh sense of wonder, right? There's nothing, I can't think of anything that is. So as long as you retain that core curiosity and you have this childlike sense of wonder, I think the rest of it can be worked through and attained. For those getting into the the other common denominator is where people have kept asking me, at least in the family, a lot of people ask me, what do I think is the impact on of the AI, Gen AI tools? How do they go through this career piece? Because you talked about testing. Is that going to go away? Earlier you talked about testing. Is that going to go away? Because now I can do automated scale testing. I can do a large LLM kind of a model of test cases, test case generation, or test data generation, etc. So for that, in terms of Gen AI, I think the piece is that I think as an industry we are still yet to come to terms with the fact that what we thought will be the last one to go away, which is the creative side of work, IT related work. So if you think about it, ability to go work with a PowerPoint all the way down to a Canva and actually generating some creative side, we thought, including, let's say, creative music or doing some editing, etc., or video editing and these kinds of things that we thought would be the last one to fall, are turning out to be the first ones at the to fall, right? So and if you take, in that sense, pure coding is a creative aspect, right? I have to take a concept and turn it into code, right? So I think we are, as an industry, we are to come to terms with what that means, right? And it definitely opens up, to me, that's not seen as a problem. It's a huge opportunity. And let me give you an example that I have been telling people. And this is where I think we have to spend a bit of time outside of what we see in the news. And for some reason, what I'm going to give you as an example was never played up by the Indian media or even the foreign media, right? About 6-8 months ago, I think September timeframe, Google released an announcement that their model on Gen AI is able to generate over 2 million crystal structures, right? Synthetic crystal structures. So based on the things, so possible crystal structures available in all minerals and in nature. Now, to give you a sense of what this particular announcement is, in our 100+ years of, or actually 200+ years of working with crystals, our knowledge base of crystals was less than 50,000 such crystal structures, right? So in 200 years, what we knew as possibility of crystals was less than 50,000. And in one fell swoop, you are now taken that 50,000 to a 2 million. Now you can argue to say, hey, this is just a generated number. What can come out of it, right? And this is where it starts to get very interesting. So a set of universities in the US picked up, I believe, about 700 of those crystal structures and said, what is the possibility of actually reverse engineering this in a lab, right? Because it's not just a can be. I mean, it's not hypothetical. How do you link a hypothetical to a can be kind of a structure? And what really blew me away was that over 400 of that would actually be almost recreated or could be brought into a lab structure. Now, if you take those numbers and you add that up, you say, that means there's a possibility that you have a 1.95 million new crystal structures that have to be brought to use, commercial use, right? So it's not a you can look at it as a half empty piece to say, hey, what happened? This has taken away all of this research need. But then the other side you have to think is that means that there's so much possibility now that is opening up that I now have to go back and validate and work through it and get it into a commercialization structure. So to your point, it's a viewpoint I have to develop, especially both the target markets that you talked about, the middle-aged people who are saying, what do I do? I actually have this bit of experience. How do I go and navigate the next few years? I believe the next few years are going to be disruptive, not for anything else, but then we will get these kind of outputs that are completely out of the scale that we have ever seen, right? And which is why I told you it's sort of surprising. A news like this, I would have expected a lot of people to talk about, right? Especially when we talk about technology, you're expecting a lot of people to talk about this news. And I'm still so surprised to say it just went off and nobody bothered to spend time looking through this particular piece.
Oh, that's wonderful. But I think we are almost out of time, but then I still have to ask you one question. How do you find time for all this?
Make time, I guess I read everything. I read anything and everything, right? I still spend a good hour. I still find time to read a novel. Novels, a novel. I still because to me, I don't. I think a lot of time we spend on TV today to see news, or other than sports, right? Is I think where there's a whole lot of repetition. Whatever you can see, you can be very efficient and you can figure that out in headlines, right? But where I still find a lot of time is read. I read anything and everything that I can get my hands onto, and not that I have to complete everything, but at least there's enough happening for you to think through and internalize.
Good. On that note, thanks a lot, Ravi, for sharing your wonderful stories and all these examples. I think make it very relatable.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for taking time. Yeah. So this is the way I can even relive all of that.
We thank Siddharth for the music and Anita for promoting the Software People stories.
If you like this episode,
Please subscribe on your favorite podcast client.
And spread the word in your network.
if you'd like to share your story,
Contact us at podcasts@pm-powerconsulting.com.